Good evening, lovely spirits. It's the wise servant here, Mr. Solace. Now, today I want to cut straight to the chase and get straight down to business. I want to do this lesson called the NEPHILIM in NEFLHEIM connection. And it's a very interesting thing I want to show y'all. Now, most of y'all may not know what NEPHLHEIM is. But I'm assuming everyone knows what the NEPHILIM are. They were spoken of in the small passage in the Bible. I think Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, speaks of the NEPHILIM. So I'm assuming everyone heard of the NEPHILIM. But NEPHLHEIM, maybe not. But I want to show y'all the connection in the two. Because this is how you'll get understanding on the NEPHILIM. Now, the Hebrew text mentions the NEPHILIM as giants, as sons of God, but it doesn't go in depth. It speaks about how they sinned against man, but it doesn't really go in depth. You just get that small passage, the NEPHILIM. They were the sons of God. They sinned against man, and they were giants, and you don't really get a full understanding of who they are and what that is. And it's a deep thing I want to break down to y'all. It's like I said, in order for you to know one thing, you have to know another. If you want to know the understandings of who the NEPHILIM were, you're not going to get it in the Hebrew text because the NEPHILIM were not Hebrew. They just encountered them. So it's a deep thing you have to grasp. Now, what are the NEPHILIM and what's the full understanding of that passage in the Bible is the question of the day. And it's a deep thing because the answer is in Scandinavian history, in Norse writings. And it all has to do with a place called NEPHLHEIM. Now, y'all have to understand, Scandinavia, and all those countries that's far north, they speak with a certain accent. So NEPHILIM and NEPHLHEIM are not two different words. They're the same word, same meaning. The thing is, the Scandinavians are those north, far north countries that's close to like Antarctica and the North Pole. They speak with a certain accent. So if you told someone from Scandinavia today, say NEPHILIM, they would say NEPHILIM or NEPHLHEIM because of the accent. So you have to understand, English comes from Old English. Old English comes from Norse. So the way they say it all has to do with accent. But this is where the knowledge gets separated. We view NEPHLHEIM, those who have understanding in Norse mythology, view NEPHLHEIM as something completely different than NEPHILIM. Now, when you're dealing with Norse mythology, I don't want you to get lost on the word mythology because all ancient texts or all ancient civilizations' history have been deemed mythology. So you have ancient Egyptian mythology, ancient Greek mythology. For some reason, we deem their history as mythology because we don't understand the way they speak or describe it. But you could just do away with the word mythology because it's going to block you from truth. Now, in order for you to understand what the NEPHILIM are that was written about in the Bible, you have to know Old Norse writings. And you have to have an understanding of the Gununja Gap in the 9 realms. Now, in Norse writings, they believe that the world that we live in, or this existence, has 9 realms. And the world in a whole is a tree. And on this tree, which is the world, you have 9 different realms or worlds. Now, I don't want to go into all 9. You can look up the story yourself. It's called the Gununja Gap. But what I wanna focus my attention on is 3 of the worlds out of the 9. So we're just gonna focus all our attention on 3 of them, because this has to do with understanding the Nephilim. Now, the 3 worlds I want to focus on is NEPHILIM, Muspelheim, and Jotunheim. Now, Muspelheim and NEPHILIM, these are the 2 primordial worlds, meaning they were the first before you got the other 7. Now, NEPHILIM was north, farthest north. NEPHILIM was the dark, cold realm. Then you had Muspelheim. It was south. And it was the fiery light world. And in between these 2 realms, you had the Gununja Gap, which is the void. So just like my hands are, the space in between is what you had that separated these 2 realms. Now, when fire smoke from Muspelheim met with the dark ice from NEPHILIM, this is how you got the other worlds in existence. And it's a deep thing, because each world has its beings or entities that dwell on it. Now, Muspelheim and NEPHILIM, being as though they're the primordial worlds, in the beginning there were no beings that dwelled on them. But when the other realms were created, then Muspelheim became home to the fire demons. And NEPHILIM became Nephil, or hell. And it was the place where those who lived dishonorable lives, this is where they were sent, to NEPHILIM. So when you died, you went to NEPHILIM, or you either went to Valhalla. But we're not dealing with Valhalla right now. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because I know a lot of y'all are like, okay, what does understanding that have to do with the full understanding of the Nephilim? And it's a simple thing. You have to understand Jotunheim. So you have NEPHILIM, Muspelheim, and then Jotunheim. Now, Jotunheim is the home or the realm of the giants. And Jotunheim is right next to Midgard, which is Earth. This is where the humans dwell. Now, the giants from Jotunheim, they would go over to Midgard and basically sin against the humans. And just them going from realm to realm, this was wrong. So being as though they lived dishonorable lives, all of the giants from Jotunheim would have been sent to Nephil or NEPHILIM when they died, because they lived dishonorable lives, being as though they sinned against those in Midgard, which is Earth. Now, this is where you get the connection between NEPHILIM and the Nephilim. Because when the giants from Jotunheim died, they were sent to Nephilim. They were no longer referred to as Jotuns from Jotunheim, because they're in spirit form now. They're dead. So they're referred to as the place they're in, which is Nephilim. And this is how you get Nephilim, because of the accent and the way we speak and the way the Norse countries speak. So they're pronouncing it Nephilim, but they're referring to the same thing as the Bible, the Nephilim, the giants from Jotunheim who died and went to Nephilim. Now, when you're dealing with Nephilim, you have hell within it. And you have the goddess Hel. So whoever is in Nephilim or Nephil or Hel, they didn't go into the individual's names. The goddess of Hel or Nephilim, her name was Hel. So her name was the same as the place, Nephil or Hel. So this is why I say the giants from Jotunheim, when they were sent to Niflheim when they died, they would have just been viewed as the NEPHILIM or the NEPHILIM, the same way the goddess Hel is in hell. So you kind of get the name of the place you're in. The giants were referred to as the Jotuns from Jotunheim. When they died and went to Niflheim, they would have been referred to as the NEPHILIM or the Nephil. So it's a deep thing you have to grasp. This is how you got that. Now, the Hebrews, they wouldn't have known all of this because the Nephilim weren't Hebrews. The Hebrews just encountered them, so they just discussed what they knew. Now, I know a lot of y'all are probably wondering, well, damn, why didn't the Hebrew Bible refer to them as Jotuns instead of Nephilim? Why did the Hebrew Bible refer to them as Nephilim instead of Jotuns? And the reason is because the Hebrew Bible, when it was written in speaking of this event of the giants sinning against man, it was speaking of the past. So you have to grasp, when the Bible was speaking of the Nephilim, they would have already been dead. They've already sinned against man and did what they did. The Hebrew Bible was just telling you the quick story of it. So it already happened. They would have already been dead. They would have already been sent to Niflheim. So this is why the Hebrew Bible refers to them as the Nephilim, because it's speaking of a past event. But in the moment that it's speaking of it, in that moment, those giants would have been in Niflheim by then. They would have been referred to as the Nephilim. Simple. Those who live dishonorable lives. This is where they were sent. Now, a lot of y'all probably wonder, why didn't the Hebrew text go in depth on the Nephilim? And the reason is because, like I said, the Nephilim are not Hebrews. The Bible is a history of the Hebrew people. Now, it goes into other peoples that they encountered, but it doesn't go in depth on these people because these people are not Hebrew, and this is the Hebrews' history. So this is why they don't go in depth on the Nephilim. This is why they don't go in depth on Sodom and Gomorrah and how it got that way and things like this, because the Bible is dealing with the Hebrew history. If you want to know the history of the Nephilim, you have to go read up on where they came from. And they come from the north, the Scandinavian, those north lands. Now, I'm not saying the Scandinavians are the Nephilim, but all those European countries that's far north, they are the descendants of these beings. Over millennia, of course, but they are the descendants of them. So this is why you have the full spectrum of the story in Norse mythology, and it's referred to as Niflheim because of their accent. But this is why you have that. It's like Sodom and Gomorrah. If you want to know the full story of that, well, then you have to read Sodom and Gomorrah's history, not the Bible. It's just like Judah, one of Israel's sons, the 12 tribes of Israel. Judah is one of the sons, but he was an outcast. He married the Canaanite woman. The Bible doesn't go in depth on Judah's life story. Why? Because Judah dwelt with the Canaan people, the people of Canaan. So if you want to know a full story of Judah, then you need to read Mesopotamian text, Babylonian text, Sumerian text, because they discuss the Canaan people. This is a place in their lands. So you would get a full story of Judah in their text, not in Hebrew. This is why it's important to read more than one thing. Y'all are lost in religion, and it traps you off in a box, and you have to just stay with one thing. But if you want a full understanding of life, you have to read everyone's history, because everyone encountered everyone at some point in time. And this is how you get these different stories. But that's why the Bible doesn't go in depth on the Hebrew text, because the Nephilim are not Hebrew. Now, I know a lot of y'all may be asking yourselves, why did the Bible refer to them as the sons of God? Where did that come from? And this is all Norse talk. See, ancient Kemetic people in different ancient civilizations, they didn't have a word God. We do. Our history comes from Norse. Our history comes from the Europeans, meaning black people, people of America. And the Europeans, in their history, they speak of gods. So when you're dealing with the Gununjagat, or the breaking down of the 9 realms, you have the dwarves, the elves, then you have the Asir gods, the Asinja gods, which is just male and female. This would be the Asgardians. So this is how you get that word gods. They viewed the people that lived in Midgard as humans. They viewed those in Jotunheim as giants. They viewed the people of Svartalfheim as the dwarves. They viewed the people of Vanaheim, the Vanir gods. So everyone had their different titles of reference. Now the reason why the Bible refers to the Nephilim as the sons of God has to do with the Norse text. Now in Norse, the first person to be in existence was Ymir. He was a giant. He was the first being to fall off the tree, the world tree. So Ymir is the first being to be in existence. He's a giant. Now Odin killed Ymir, and Ymir's body became Jotunheim, which is where the Jotun giants live. So they have beef with the Asgards for life. Now, you have to remember, Ymir is the first being to be in existence. So to all Norse people, or anyone in the 9 realms of existence, Ymir would be a god, being as though he was first. So even if you weren't a giant, let's say you were an Asgardian, you would still know of Ymir as a god, because he was first. You have to get good and bad out your mind. They didn't view God in a good and bad way. It was just the title of the entity. So the giants, they were giants. That's what kind of entity they were. Those in Midgard, they were humans. That was what kind of entity they were. In Asgard, they were referred to as gods, and that was what the kind of entity they were. But this is why they were referred to as sons of God in the text, in the Hebrew text, because this is how they would have identified themselves to the Hebrew people, as the sons of God, the sons of Ymir. Ymir's body is Jotunheim. So it's a deep thing. Now, all the Jotun giants would have been sent to Niflheim upon their death just because of the way they lived. They caused a lot of destruction throughout all the 9 realms because they felt some kind of way about Odin killing Ymir. So it's a deep thing you have to grasp. If Ymir's the first being, they feel like everyone should have had respect for Ymir. But Ymir was like a monster. You have to read Norse mythology. Not a monster in the sense of a person, but in personality, he wasn't good for the life. He was bad. He was fucking everybody up, in a sense. Excuse my language. But this is why they were referred to as the sons of God. Now, a lot of y'all may wonder, why were they referred to as the fallen angels? And here's where it's deep. On the world tree in Norse mythology, NEFLHEIM is north. It's at the bottom. Muspelheim is at the top. It's at the south. Now, Jotunheim is in the middle, next to Midgard. Now, when the Jotun giants sinned against man, died, and went to NEFLHEIM, they dropped their estate. This is why in the Bible, when it says they left their first estate, it is speaking of when the Jotuns left Jotunheim and went to Midgard. And then they lived their lives. And, all beings die eventually. And when they die, instead of them ascending up to Valhalla, which is a place in Asgard, they drop down to NEFLHEIM, which is one of the primordial worlds. So you have to grasp, it's almost like going back to the beginnings. Instead of them moving forward, they just dropped all the way back to the beginnings, to the dark, cold world, which is now hell, home of hell, the goddess. And the Nephilim are the NEPHILIM or NEFLHEIM. However your accent is how you will say it. But this is the giants that they're referring to. And it's a deep thing. It doesn't matter if these texts are right or wrong. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with your understanding on life in the beginnings. So they're breaking this text down to describe the beginnings and the creation of this existence. Now, the actual stories are probably real events that happen. Mankind has their experiences. But the explanation of how the world came into existence, this is similar in every civilization, but it's different also. And this is because the creation is not a physical thing. It's physicalness coming into being. So they're just trying to figure out a way to explain it. So I have an understanding of life. I wrote a book called Knowledge of Shadows, and it's a creation story for this time. Now, my knowledge of how life comes into being, meaning, science, protons, neutrons, electrons, up and down quarks, these things. This is what brings forth the physical. So when you have an understanding of that, you put it into words, into a story so people can understand. And then from there, you go into actual individuals' lives in their actual true events. But you start the creation off however you start it, but it'll always be the same. So if you read my book and how creation started, the only true difference is I start mine off with there was light first. And in Norse mythology and other ancient civilizations, they viewed it as it was light first before the darkness. In Norse mythology, they see him as, they don't know which one came first. It's debate, NEPHILIM or Muspelheim. But those two were first. So it's all a matter of understanding. We have to understand when we're reading these texts, we can't get lost in one person's history. Because with life, you have people interacting and encountering each other. And when you don't read a certain... So we tend to think like, oh, this civilization came first. And this civilization's stories is right and this one's is wrong. And it doesn't have to do with right and wrong. It just has to do with when they encountered one another. So the ancient Egyptian people encountered the Hebrews at some point in life. Now the Hebrew history goes farther back than when they encountered the Egyptians, and the Egyptians' history go farther back before when they encountered the Hebrews. But so you have to grasp, this is my point. We think, oh, this comes first, and it's not like that. Everyone's history goes all the way back to the beginnings because this is life. And you have to know each civilization to get a full spectrum of the understanding of the whole story in a whole. So when you get to the Bible and it speaks of the Nephilim, then you have to switch text. If you have questions on what is the Nephilim, you have to go to their beginnings, and you have to go to those north countries that's close by Antarctica. This is why there's so much speculation about there being Anunnaki and all of this giant, tall white giant talk connected with Antarctica and those far north lands. This is why. Because a lot of people have an understanding, and this is where that all derives from. So it's like the Nephilim, their descendants would be those old Norse countries, and how they begin to slowly interact with the rest of the world. This is why you have so many different civilizations speaking of tall white giants in their history, and we deem it as mythology. But this is what they're speaking of. They're speaking of their interactions with the descendants of these Nephilim beings, which would be like the Scandinavian people and all those North countries. But it's a deep thing you have to grasp. In order for you to understand one thing, you have to know another, because all history is intertwined, being as though history has to deal with people, and people encounter one another. So my history goes back before I met my children's mother, and their history goes farther back before they met me. So you can't think, oh, solid story of his history contradicts his baby mother's history. It contradicts. Well, that's because we're two different people who encountered each other, and no one history predates the other. It's just a matter of when we came in contact with one another. And I say that because I know a lot of people may say, oh, but the Hebrew text predates Norse mythology. And you have to understand, before things are written or carved in stone, they're spoke. Now, some civilizations decided to write down what was spoken for the purposes of selling it. So you have to grasp, no one needs to write down their history. You know your history. How many people in today's times have books on their life? Not many. Most of us know our own life story, so we've never written it down. And it's the same in ancient times. Most people don't write down their history. They know it. They speak it. They teach it to those that come after, but they don't write it. For what? People only write down history when you're dealing with selling and trying to promote something. So this is the only time you're going to see a thing written down for the purposes of selling. So it's a deep thing you have to grasp. This is why that's like that. But no one came first, no one came last. It's all about when they encountered. And it's a deep thing. It's your main man, Solace.